hold your hand when I say this. Come here. Come closer. Stop letting other people control your emotions. Stop letting them ruin your day, control your thoughts, and ultimately waste your time. And listen, it's not that you're overly sensitive or too emotional. It's that you lack boundaries. Now, I know that was a bit of a harsh way to start this episode, but it felt necessary. I'm Amber Mitchell, and this is the Where Do We Start podcast, where we talk about the stars, the self, and everything in between. And in this episode, I really want to talk about how to overcome your triggers and really, truly be unbothered by other people and their foolishness, and how to avoid crashing out, because let's be honest, it's not cute. And it's also not going to get you what you want. Let's just get right into this, because the fact of the matter is overcoming triggers, not being so bothered by other people and avoiding the crash out. If you have triggers usually come from trauma. And a lot of the time, we don't really know what our triggers are until we're faced with them. And so this is a process that really requires resilience and self-awareness. You have to know what your triggers are, and you have to learn how to deal with those triggers so that you can deal with other triggers as they come up, right? You kind of build this resilience to be able to deal with other things that might come up. And so knowing your current existing triggers is a really good place to start. Recognizing, I think hearing the word trigger is just, it's also one of those like buzzwords that goes around a lot, but knowing what an emotional trigger really is, you have to understand, kind of having the self-awareness to realize, how do you feel when something happens, right? It's more than just like being upset. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it feel like? What emotions come up? What thoughts come along with that trigger? What are your initial reactions? And I think the biggest thing about being triggered is feeling kind of a lack of control, over your own emotions and over your responses. And so recognizing the feelings that come up that you don't like, what those are, being able to really name them. And then of course, looking deeper at why you feel so triggered, right? Being able to understand what situation from your past is causing you to feel like this now. Right? Why do you feel, because someone, didn't answer your text all day, you are now feeling triggered, and this feeling of insecurity and frustration, and maybe this person doesn't even really like me. All these feelings start coming up, right? But why? What is it from your past that is triggering you to have that sort of response to that? And I think it's also really important to understand triggers as signals from your body, with the purpose of keeping you safe, because I am definitely someone who sometimes gets upset with myself for being upset at things. I know a lot of us do this, right? So when you start to recognize that you're being triggered by something and you're frustrated at the fact that you're triggered by it, but recognize that a trigger is really just something that your body is reminding you that, hey, this happened before and we did not like it. There was a negative outcome to this emotion, or to this, whatever the stimulus is, the situation. There was a negative outcome to that before, so we want to try to avoid it. And I think having a little bit of grace for yourself and gratitude for the fact that you feel triggered because your body is trying to keep you safe. And I also think it's really important to understand that how you feel and in this moment when you're feeling triggered, it has way more to do with you than it does with whatever it is that you feel is triggering you. Whatever the external thing is, it is more about you than it is that thing. And it's really about how you react to the triggers. That's essentially what we're trying to work through today and trying to change, is being able to react to the triggers in a better, more healthy way. And so understanding the core or the source of whatever this pain is really going to help you to be able to react to it and know what to do with it in the future. And more importantly, it's going to help you know what to do with it in that moment in a healthy way, because you don't want that energy to just sit inside of you. Trust me, as someone who has their moon in Capricorn and their Mars in Cancer, you don't want to just be holding on to those emotions. Now, so there's a few different ways that we can kind of look at this to try to handle triggers in the most healthy way. Now, some triggers can actually just be resolved by removing yourself or avoiding the trigger itself. That can be pretty simple, right? If you can simply say, you know what, I'm triggered by that's a situation that's going to trigger me, I'm going to avoid it, right? Or that's something that I know I will feel triggered by, I'm going to leave, right? I feel triggered now, I'm going to leave. That's perfectly fine. In some situations, you can just simply remove or avoid the situation. But in other cases, there's a behavior or a situation that has to be corrected. It doesn't necessarily make the most sense for you to just remove yourself. And there's kind of different ways that you want to go about this depending on if it's a behavior that needs to be changed in someone else or if it's something that needs to be changed in you. So we'll talk about both. So if it's a behavior that needs to be changed in someone else, and I'll give you a really good example of this. I know a lot of my millennial friends who don't have kids yet can probably relate to this, but there are elders in our families and in our communities that will often probe at us when we are going to have kids. And they don't necessarily mean any harm by it. Sometimes it's very simple, small comments that they make. But what they don't understand is that question can actually be very triggering depending on where that person is at in their fertility journey and whether or not they even want kids to begin with. But nonetheless, it's something that I know a lot of us can relate to. So that's a triggering question. It's a triggering behavior. And it doesn't necessarily make sense for you to just not communicate with that person anymore, especially, if it's someone in your family who you love and want to spend time with. It's a behavior that has to be corrected in the other person. And so you can simply ask them to stop, right? But explaining to them why. Now, I'm not a huge fan of over explaining yourself and explaining, your feelings to people. But I think in this case, it is pretty important that you're not just saying, hey, stop saying that, but saying, hey, I feel this way when you say that. Could you stop? Or when you do that, it upsets me. You have to stop. And it's really important also to understand that boundaries mean nothing if you don't enforce them. So having something to stand on to say that, like, if you continue to ask me that, I'm not going to talk to you, right? I'm not going to continue engaging in conversations with you if you continue to speak to me that way, if you continue to ask me those questions. So you have to be willing to enforce the boundary, stop doing it or this, right? There's something that's going to happen if you do not comply, if you do not change the behavior, okay? So that's a really good way, that's a really healthy way to deal with it when the behavior needs to be changed in someone else. However, there are situations when the behavior needs to be changed within you. And a good example of this is, and I know some of you guys might have heard about this scenario. It was a really popular scenario that I saw online where a girl asked her friend not to wear a certain outfit or not to dress a certain way to her birthday because she felt like she would kind of outshine her. And I think this is a very good example of when the behavior needs to be changed within you, because it's a little ridiculous to ask someone who is your friend not to dress nice or not to look a certain way or not to behave a certain way just so that you feel better about yourself. And so while this is a bit more of a complex trigger to understand, it's an important one because you have to realize that it's something that you should not be triggered by. And you have to look a little deeper at that of why do you not want your friend to wear makeup to your birthday? Why do you not want your friend to dress up to your birthday? What is it that, understanding that insecurity and what that feeling really is within you? Why do you feel triggered if you're out with your friends and people are paying more attention to one of your friends than you? Why does that make you feel triggered? It's something that you really have to kind of understand within yourself. So really understanding those feelings of discomfort. And this kind of goes back to what I said about being able to recognize triggers, being able to recognize when you feel upset, when you feel an emotion through your body, where that feeling is coming from in your body, as well as what is the thing that caused it, and being able to look at kind of what you need to change about yourself, right? Because in this particular example, this is more about building self-confidence within you so that you're not triggered by your friends getting attention. And I think this is one I often see in romantic relationships too. So for example, say your partner goes out with his friends and he doesn't necessarily do anything wrong, right? Like he's out with his friends. He comes home at a pretty normal time. He keeps in contact with you while he's out with his friends. You know where he's at, what he's doing. So the behavior itself is perfectly normal, right? I'm not talking about the other version of this where the person is out all night, doesn't come home until a crazy time, isn't calling you or answering your phone calls, and they're not where they said they were going to be. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about the behavior itself is perfectly normal, and yet you still feel triggered. You still feel upset. You're still wondering like, well, what is he doing and who's he with? And well, he texted me an hour ago, but he hasn't texted me back. That sort of behavior, recognizing that the situation itself, the behavior itself is normal, but your reaction to it isn't. And that's something that you have to really look at within yourself of why. Again, it does kind of go back to what situation in your past is making you feel this way. And I hate to be all Freudian with the psychology of this all, but so many things, if we really thought about them and thought about the core of where things come from and what we experienced prior or in our childhood, we would recognize that so much of what we do now and so much of what we feel now and why we react to things the way that we do comes from those experiences. And being able to point that out, being able to recognize the core of these feelings is really going to help you in pushing through these triggers and actually changing the behavior if it's something that needs to be changed within you. Now, whatever way that you decide to address a trigger, be that emotionally or mentally, you also have to address that trigger physically. And usually this part has to come first. So I'm mentioning these things of like being able to, communicate to people who need to change their behaviors, being able to recognize when a behavior within yourself needs to be changed. But the fact of the matter is, it's almost like learning self-defense, that you can do all of these things and you can know all of this stuff, but when it happens, when you're in the moment, you have to have that muscle memory to be able to react appropriately. And that's not going to come immediately. It's something that you have to practice. And so the first part of this, probably the most important thing, is knowing how to handle triggers physically. And this requires regulating your nervous system. Now, I am not a doctor or a therapist, but I do know a little bit about this topic. So I'll share with you what I know. And I definitely encourage you to do the research yourself as well to understand your body better and the best ways for you to regulate your nervous system. Because this is truly going to be the key to how you build resilience and handle triggers and avoid crashing out and overall be a more emotionally grounded person. Now, there are probably hundreds of methods of nervous system regulation. Again, I am not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to give you a few of the ones that I do know of. So the first one and most common one and probably most effective one is breath work. And it can be as simple as breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, repeat. And doing this really is one of those things that regulates your body in a way that tells your body that you are not in fight or flight mode and that you can relax and you can think through and properly kind of know what to do next in a situation where you're being triggered. Again, of course, this is within the context that it's safe for you to do this if you're being triggered by something, right? So other methods of meditative breathing, you can definitely look up. There are probably hundreds of methods of breathing and breath work that work, and probably methods that work specifically for certain triggers, right? Depending on what you're feeling. So that's one. The other is tapping. Not sure if you heard that, but like tapping on your forehead or your chest, different places. There are different methods of that as well. And it is something that is effective at regulating your nervous system. Music and frequency is an awesome way to help regulate your nervous system. Listening to calming music, meditative music, calming frequencies, as well as taking a cold shower. It actually has been proven to trigger the release of the stress reducing hormones like endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine. So the important part of this, of course, is just knowing what is going to work the best for you, right? If the breathing works for you, go for it. If the tapping works, if you're able to go take a cold shower and that works for you, whatever it is that's going to help you to regulate your nervous system to be able to handle the trigger from the emotional and mental standpoint. So this is kind of the most important part of being able to deal with those triggers. And I think that once you get in the habit of doing these things, it's not something that you will, every time you're triggered, you have to go take a cold shower. Not necessarily. Like I said, what we're doing here is working on building up resilience so that you can have that sort of unbothered attitude, and really be able to deal with your triggers from a more healthy and grounded perspective. But this is kind of the part that you want to do before you deal with them socially. If it's something you have to address another person about, you want to regulate yourself first before you go and have that like emotionally charged conversation. And what you realize is that by repeating this process of regulating your nervous system during very stressful and triggering events and being able to be aware of your emotions builds a better relationship with yourself and builds stronger emotional awareness. So like I said, this helps you build that resilience to deal with future triggers, as well as having more control over your emotions allows you to limit what has access to them. This is how you eventually get to that point of being what people would like to refer to as unbothered, right? Untriggerable. You get to that point by doing this sort of work. So I hope that this episode was particularly helpful and informative for you. Relatable, I'm sure that it is. But I hope that, can we end the crash out culture? I mean, I really think it's really not cute. And like I said, it's something that you don't get what you want by crashing out on people. You really don't. Ultimately, I know that there's this whole trend of like being like a recovering crash out or like an ex crash out. And yeah, that's cute, but recognize that you really don't get what you want when you engage in that type of behavior. So while I'm sure that this episode was pretty relatable for you, I do hope that at its core it was helpful and informative to you. If you like content like this and you want even deeper, more personalized content, then definitely be sure to join me over on Patreon at The Cosmic Cousins, because we have a whole lot going on over there. And it's when you join, you get access to all of the previous posts that I've made, and there's just a wealth of information and guides and things that are super helpful to everyone as humans. So I hope that you do at least go take a look over there. And if you want to keep up with me daily, I do also post daily updates and more astrology related things on my Instagram at the Astro Lotus. But I want to thank you for being here. Definitely like and follow if you have not already. Leave me a review if you enjoyed this and if you've enjoyed past episodes. And I will see you in the next one. Take care. Keep on shining.